I done slept too late.
Mama, you won't have to work today. You're free.
Well, in 1831, Nat Turner led a slave rebellion that resulted in the deaths of over 50 white slave owners and the eventual execution of over 200 slaves who took part in it. This is a compelling story. William Styron turned it into a Pulitzer Prize-winning book. Hollywood has tried to make it into a film or toyed with it for decades. Norman Jewison, in particular, who directed In the Heat of the Night and A Soldier's Story, wanted to bring it to the screen, but the studio got cold feet, thinking it was too controversial, too hot button. Well, Nate Parker, a young actor, put his career on hold for years in order to make this movie The Birth of a Nation. And he has done it as writer, director, and producer, and star. He's cast himself as Nat Turner in the role of the key player here. Now, we see this movie unfold mostly as a traditional biopic. You've seen these kinds of stories many times before. I actually was disappointed, considering this film won the top 2 awards at the Sundance Film Festival in January and was bought by Fox Searchlight for $17.5 million. I expected more, especially when you consider Fox Searchlight also released the artistic triumph and brilliant movie 12 Years a Slave, which won the Best Picture Oscar a few years ago. Now, that movie was complex and interesting, come from director Steve McQueen. This movie seems to be a pale imitation. Maybe it's unfair to compare these two, but coming from the same studio and a similar subject matter, I have to do that. And this one does not measure up.
Exhort servants to be obedient unto their own masters, and to please them well in all things, not answering again.
You were bought with a price. Do not become slaves of men.
He that shall blaspheme against the Holy Ghost hath never forgiveness, but is in danger.
Beware of false prophets who come dressed in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravening wolves.
It certainly has a good cast. Nate Parker has cast it well. Armie Hammer, I thought, was terrific as the young friend of Nat growing up, who grows up to be the slave owner when Nat becomes the slave. He enlists Nat to go around and energize other slaves at other places who are getting a little bit unruly, because Nat has real abilities as a preacher to be inspiring. But what Nat sees horrifies him, and that begins the whole idea for this infamous rebellion that lasted only 48 hours. The movie itself feels a much longer. I thought the first 90 minutes were rather boring until you get to the rebellion, which is exciting stuff to see, but it's not particularly well filmed.
On to Jerusalem.
I don't know, maybe Nate Parker should have cast someone else in the role of Nat Turner and left the filmmaking aspect of the movie to himself and have more time to get this thing on the screen the way it should be. It's a shame because it could have been so much more. I really am intrigued by the whole idea of it, and certainly it is a very relevant movie today with Black Lives Matter and all the upheaval in the streets of our inner cities right now. You could not be more timely to look at where we are now through the prism of history. That may be the biggest value of this movie, and for those who should see this movie, I'd say it's definitely worthwhile going to a theater and catching to see something from a different viewpoint than you may have seen before. It certainly has something to say. It just doesn't say it that well. I say no.